What if the country you were taught to pity was quietly paying ordinary people far more than you ever imagined? For many in Northern England, comparing incomes with Americans can turn one simple number into a brutal reality check. How can the America so often portrayed as unaffordable still offer this much earning power? And if the gap is this wide, what else about American life has been misunderstood? America pays what? For years, the loudest stories crossing the Atlantic have made the United States sound like a place where every paycheck gets chased down the street by rent, insurance, and some mysterious bill nobody remembers agreeing to. Then World Cup visitors arrive, start talking to ordinary Americans about work, and one innocent question changes the mood completely. How much do you make? That is where the postcard version of America disappears and the calculator comes out.
Can we talk about the salary difference between the US and the UK? I think this is one of the things that shocked me the most when I moved out here, because the pound is worth so much more than the dollar. Like 70 pounds is like almost dang near $100. However, the salaries are not proportional in the US and UK. So for example, if you're a new grad in let's say a field related to tech or something in the UK, your starting salary would be somewhere between like 25,000 to, I don't know, 30,000 or 40,000 or something. Whereas in the US, that's actually on the lower end of starting salary. So in the US, starting salary for, let's say, somebody who graduated with a degree in, I don't know, cybersecurity or in information systems, which is something like tech related, that would be 80,000 to like 100,000, and that's just like starting salary. Whereas in the UK, that's on the higher end of salary, even for like the duration of a career. And that translates to healthcare as well. Here, doctors get paid similarly to how, let's say, teachers get paid in the US. Whereas in the US, doctors get paid like a lot of money, like way more than 6 figures. And before y'all come at me in the comments, because I know you are, you're gonna say, oh, well, we get free healthcare, we get a month off every year, et cetera, which obviously the US for sure should have universal healthcare. I wish we had that. But if you get a really good job in the US, you still have the option to get essentially free healthcare because your job is paying for most of your healthcare. And it's unfortunate that healthcare is tied to your job in the US, but I'm just saying that there is a chance for you to still get free healthcare just through your job. And a lot of jobs are generous with PTO as well. Like you can get unlimited PTO with several companies. So it's not a one size fits all. It's a very nuanced conversation, but to me, I'm just shocked because I'm like, the pound is worth more than the dollar, but the salaries are not adding up. So this is something that I haven't been able to figure out the answer to on like just why that is. And I guess the answer is maybe universal healthcare and the taxes around that, but it's just something that's so interesting to me.
Asking New Yorkers their salaries because the UK ones are dead.
I work retail and 125? It's kind of light.
What?
I work as a model and 6K, 8K.
So you earn $72,000 a year on average.
I'm now a gym/movement/dance teacher and now making over 60K.
A year?
A year.
Whoa, and that's a fun job, right?
I love it.
I am a graduate student, but
Okay.
I do get paid a little bit.
You get paid to be a grad student.
$1 million.
Do you?
Nah, I'm just kidding. It's just 40K, enough to survive, travel a little.
But most in the UK don't pay at all, you know that. So all the doctorate students have other jobs.
I'm a sales consultant for a jewelry store. Till last year I did like 60K with like the bonuses and all of that. So yeah, but yeah, you will think it's like a lot, but not really.
It is way more in the UK. So what you work in a store?
Yes, I work in the mall. Yeah.
Okay, you're earning double what people with your job earn in the UK. How crazy is that?
The most revealing comparison is not about skyscrapers, stadiums, or giant pickup trucks. It is the price placed on an hour of ordinary work. OECD wage data have repeatedly put the United States near the top of the major advanced economies. On a purchasing power basis, average annual pay in the United States has recently been around the $80,000 mark, while the United Kingdom has sat much lower, around the mid-60,000s. Those figures are broad national averages, but they help explain why the gap can feel even sharper in Northern England, where earnings have traditionally trailed London and the Southeast. That regional detail matters. In cities such as Newcastle, Sheffield, Liverpool, Leeds, and Manchester, there are skilled workers doing serious jobs in engineering, healthcare, finance, technology, construction, and logistics, yet the salary ceiling can arrive surprisingly early. Britain has discussed its north-south economic divide for decades because the gap is visible in pay packets, as well as property prices. Put that next to an American labor market where the same categories of work can command noticeably higher compensation, and the reaction starts making sense. What makes the comparison so entertaining is that Americans often do not realize how unusual their numbers sound abroad. A salary that gets described in Dallas or Charlotte as pretty solid can land in a British conversation like someone casually announcing they found an extra bedroom behind the refrigerator. Nobody needs dramatic music, the exchange rate is doing enough work already.
So many people get shocked when I tell them UK doctors make so much less than their US counterparts. And as you can see in this table, there's a massive difference there. I mean, look at the average salary, 294k, almost 300k, compared to almost 70k. That's almost 4 times less in the UK. Now you're telling me that isn't a significant difference. People often assume, because US doctors get paid so well, that in the UK we'd be paid at a similar amount. But we have a public healthcare system here, and it's privatized in the US, but even that doesn't account for that massive difference. So I want to know what doctors think about this. Obviously, a lot of strikes going on in the UK right now, and a lot of doctors leaving. I mean, myself, I work in tech a lot of the time now, and it's just a staggering difference in salaries.
This is a good salary in the UK? £30,000? £30,000 is $40,000. $40,000 is a good salary in the UK. You tell anybody you make $40,000 in the US, they'll go, that's not so bad. And in their head, they're thinking, damn, you're broke as f. To be fair, he is also working another part-time job on top of his full-time job and is a landlord. And after all of that, £60,000. It's about $80,000. Now I know the cost of living in the UK is not that great either. You're telling me you're a baller over there. Rent by itself is $18,000. You're spending more than half of your full-time income on rent. People say over here that you're doing a good job if you're keeping the amount of money that you spend on rent less than 30% of your income. Notice how within these categories, there's no fun. Miscellaneous probably just means but at least he's saving a good bit, so guess you can't really talk that much shit, huh?
And this is where the familiar media image of America starts to wobble. Europeans are often shown the expensive edge of American life first. Medical bills, Manhattan rent, college tuition, San Francisco housing. Those things are real and deserve to be discussed. What receives far less attention is the other side of the equation. A huge economy where employers compete aggressively for labor, skilled trades can pay exceptionally well, and moving companies can produce a meaningful jump in income. That does not make every American richer than every Briton, and it certainly does not erase the cost of living. But for visitors who arrive expecting a country permanently crushed by expenses, discovering how high American wages can run creates a wonderfully awkward moment. The stereotype came prepared for an argument. The paycheck brought receipts. Sometimes the most persuasive advertisement for America is not a flag, a speech, or a skyline. It is hearing what an ordinary job can actually pay. Suddenly, American confidence around work becomes much easier for curious overseas visitors to understand. The money left over. A paycheck tells you what you earn. Disposable income tells you what your life can actually do. That distinction is where the American comparison becomes much more interesting, because the real luxury is often not a flashy car or a giant house. It is reaching Friday night and still having enough breathing room to say yes to dinner, a ball game, a weekend drive, or one more ridiculously oversized Costco purchase that somehow requires its own seatbelt. This is one reason the income gap can feel larger than salary tables suggest. In the OECD Better Life data, household net adjusted disposable income per person in the United States has been reported at roughly $51,000 a year, compared with about $33,000 in the United Kingdom when adjusted for purchasing power. That is a very different measurement from gross salary. It asks a more practical question. After taxes and transfers are accounted for, how much economic room does the average household actually have? For Northern England, that comparison becomes even more revealing because regional disposable income has long sat below the British average. OMS regional data consistently place the Northeast among England's lowest areas for gross disposable household income per person, while London and the Southeast remain far ahead. In other words, somebody living in Newcastle can already feel a noticeable economic distance from London before America even enters the conversation. Then cities such as Dallas, Houston, Charlotte, or Indianapolis complicate the picture further. They are not Manhattan or San Francisco, where housing costs can behave like they have hired a personal trainer and decided to bulk up. These are large American metros where households can still encounter strong salaries, suburban space, extensive retail competition, and a consumer culture built around convenience. The result is a kind of everyday abundance that visitors may notice before they ever see an economic chart. That abundance is easy to misunderstand from overseas because international coverage naturally focuses on dramatic American expenses. A $2,000 medical bill travels across social media much faster than a family in Ohio, casually loading groceries, sports equipment, and a week's worth of supplies into an SUV. Ordinary purchasing power is terrible television, yet it shapes daily life far more often than a viral headline does. This is where America becomes strangely addictive to many visitors during a long stay. The attraction is not simply things are cheaper, because plenty of things are not. It is the feeling that economic life has more room to move. Bigger stores stay open later. Road trips feel normal. Restaurants compete aggressively for customers, and entire suburban landscapes seem designed around the assumption that people will go somewhere, buy something, try something, and come back next weekend. In Manchester or Leeds, a night out can still be wonderful, but British households have spent years dealing with tighter real income growth and higher pressure from energy, housing, and food costs. The difference visitors may notice in America is psychological as much as financial. Spending can feel less ceremonial. That small change matters more than it sounds. When ordinary pleasures require less internal negotiation, daily life starts feeling lighter. The United States does not magically remove bills, but in many places it gives households something equally valuable: margin. And once people get used to having margin, going home can feel surprisingly difficult. More cities, more chances. One of America's strangest advantages is something visitors can miss because it does not come with a price tag. The country gives ambition more than one address. In Britain, a young professional in Newcastle, Leeds, or Sheffield can build a very good life, but the gravitational pull of London has been so strong for so long that career progression often feels as if someone quietly moved the finish line south. America plays by a very different map. Look at the number of heavyweight job markets scattered across the United States. Finance has New York, but technology has Seattle, Austin, Boston, San Jose, and increasingly places like Raleigh. Energy has Houston. Logistics has Memphis and Louisville. Entertainment has Los Angeles and Atlanta. Healthcare and research have Boston, Minneapolis, Cleveland, and the Research Triangle. Manufacturing stretches across states such as Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and South Carolina. An American worker can change industries, salaries, or even lifestyle without automatically being forced toward one national capital. That matters far more than it sounds. Britain has spent years trying to narrow its regional productivity gap because the numbers are stubborn. ONS data have repeatedly shown London producing far more economic output per person than regions in northern England. Gross value added per head in London has been roughly twice the level recorded in parts of the Northeast in recent years. The difference does not mean northern cities lack talent. Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, and Newcastle are full of it. The problem is that high-paying headquarters, investment, and certain specialist industries have historically been concentrated much more heavily in the South. America spreads that economic firepower around in a way that can feel almost luxurious by comparison. A software engineer can look at Seattle, Austin, Denver, Raleigh, or Boston and have 5 completely different versions of adulthood waiting on the other side of the application button. Someone working in aerospace can consider Texas, Washington, California, Florida, or Alabama. A nurse can move between major hospital systems across dozens of metropolitan areas. It is career choice multiplied by geography. That freedom has a cultural effect too. Americans are remarkably comfortable treating relocation like a career tool. Moving from Ohio to Texas for a better offer may involve boxes, a U-Haul, and one family member asking why anyone voluntarily moves somewhere that hot, but culturally, it is perfectly understandable. People follow opportunity. For a visitor from northern England, that can make America feel unusually open. The country is huge enough that one expensive city does not get to hold the entire economy hostage. San Francisco housing becomes ridiculous. Texas raises its hand. New York feels impossible. Charlotte, Atlanta, Nashville, or Columbus enter the chat like helpful cousins carrying folding chairs. This helps explain why American prosperity can surprise people who have mostly encountered the country through national averages. The United States does not have one labor market. It has a collection of giant regional economies competing with one another for workers, companies, investment, and talent. Competition between places is easy to underestimate, but workers benefit from it. States advertise lower taxes, cities court employers, universities feed local industries, and companies know skilled employees can simply look somewhere else. That possibility creates a very American kind of optimism. If one place stops working, there may genuinely be another city where the same skills are worth more. For somebody accustomed to a smaller country where London dominates so much of the economic conversation, that feels less like changing cities and more like discovering the map had extra levels hidden inside it. The thermostat shock. There's a strangely effective way to measure prosperity that never appears on a salary slip. Walk into somebody's house in July and see whether they are arguing with the thermostat. In much of America, the answer is usually no. The air conditioner hums in the background, the refrigerator is full size, the dryer is running, and nobody is behaving as though turning on one more appliance requires approval from Congress. That everyday comfort becomes surprisingly revealing when compared with Britain. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the average residential electricity price in America was about 16.5 cents per kilowatt hour in 2024. British households, by contrast, were paying roughly 25 pence per kilowatt hour under Ofgem's price cap periods around 2025, before even considering the difference in household incomes. Exchange rates move, taxes differ, and the systems are structured differently, so this is not a perfect one-to-one contest. Still, the basic pattern is difficult to miss. Household energy has generally been much cheaper in the United States. For Northern England, that matters because cold weather is hardly an occasional guest. Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle, and Sheffield spend long stretches of the year under gray skies, with heating becoming part of the household budget rather than a seasonal afterthought. Britain's energy crisis after 2021 made that relationship even more sensitive. The government eventually introduced support schemes because gas and electricity bills had become a genuine political issue for millions of households. America has its own painful utility bills, especially during brutal summers in Texas, Arizona, or Florida, but the cultural relationship with household energy often feels different. Central air conditioning is common across huge parts of the country. Tumble dryers are ordinary, large refrigerators are standard, and many suburban homes are built around the assumption that machines will quietly handle comfort in the background. To a British visitor, that can feel almost suspiciously luxurious. You step outside into a 95-degree afternoon in Dallas, where the pavement could probably toast a hamburger bun, then walk through one automatic door, and suddenly the building feels like somebody stored February inside. Americans barely notice the transition because they grew up with it. Visitors notice immediately, and this is where a small cultural detail starts saying something larger about living standards. Wealth is not always a bigger number in a bank account. Sometimes it is the freedom to stop thinking about certain expenses every hour of the day. A household that can cool several rooms, run a clothes dryer, keep a large freezer, charge devices, cook dinner, and still treat electricity as background infrastructure experiences comfort differently from a household trained to watch every unit of energy carefully. That is why American convenience can become addictive during a longer stay. It quietly removes tiny negotiations from daily life. There is less discussion about whether the dryer really needs to run tonight, whether the bedroom is worth cooling, or whether everybody can survive another hour before touching the thermostat. No parade announces this advantage, and no tourism campaign needs to explain it. You simply live inside it for a few weeks. Then one day you realize the thermostat has stopped feeling like a financial decision and started behaving like what Americans always assumed it was: a button on the wall. That may sound ridiculously small until you have lived somewhere where comfort itself comes with a calculator. The grocery plot twist. If you want to know whether a country feels wealthy, forget the skyline for a moment and watch what happens inside a grocery cart. Food is where income becomes painfully practical because nobody can postpone dinner until the economy improves. And this is one area where the American experience can surprise visitors from Britain in a way that no salary chart quite prepares them for. According to USDA data, Americans have historically spent a relatively small share of their disposable personal income on food consumed at home, compared with the households in many other countries. In recent years, that share has generally remained below 6%. Britain is also a wealthy country with an efficient grocery sector, but ONS household spending data show food and non-alcoholic drinks taking a noticeably larger share of household budgets, especially once lower-income families are separated from national averages. That difference becomes important in Northern England, where earnings are generally below those in London and the Southeast. A grocery bill that looks ordinary on paper can therefore take a larger bite out of monthly income in places such as Newcastle, Sunderland, Sheffield, or Liverpool. Inflation made that pressure even more visible after 2021, when British food prices rose sharply and grocery shopping became a national conversation rather than background noise. Then somebody walks into an American supermarket. The first surprise is often not one particular price. It is the combination of scale, competition, and choice. Walmart is competing with Target, Kroger, Costco, Aldi, Trader Joe's, regional chains, dollar stores, warehouse clubs, and whatever supermarket opened across the road, because apparently one grocery store per per intersection was considered insufficient. For Americans, that is Tuesday. For somebody used to a smaller retail environment, the sheer amount of shelf space can feel like the serial aisle-filed paperwork to become its own county. A family-sized package in Britain can sometimes look suspiciously like the American version's appetizer. The joke works because there is a deeper economic reason behind it. The United States has more than 330 million consumers spread across one enormous integrated market. Food producers, retailers, logistics companies, and wholesalers operate at extraordinary scale. That does not make every product cheap, and Americans have certainly felt food inflation in recent years, but scale gives retailers room to compete aggressively on quantity, promotions, loyalty programs, store brands, and bulk packaging. Costco may be the purest expression of the idea. Nobody walks in intending to buy 48 rolls of paper towels and leaves feeling completely innocent, yet the entire business model reflects something deeply American. Buy more now, pay less per unit, and find somewhere in the garage to explain your decisions later. That abundance can become strangely comforting during a long visit. It changes grocery shopping from a careful mission into something closer to browsing. Families can compare 10 versions of the same product, buy in bulk, stock a large freezer, and reduce how often they need to shop. The supermarket becomes part warehouse, part food court, part minor weekend expedition. None of this means Americans never worry about grocery prices. They absolutely do. The interesting difference is how much competition and purchasing scale soften the experience for many households. When visitors hear that American salaries can be higher, the number feels theoretical. When they see a cart piled high with food and realize the household buying it may also earn considerably more, the comparison becomes physical. Suddenly, richer is no longer an economic word. It is a full refrigerator with enough leftovers to require Tupperware strategy. Room to breathe. Sometimes the American wealth gap does not arrive as a number. It arrives when a visitor walks into an ordinary house, puts down a suitcase, looks around, and realizes the suitcase suddenly has enough room to start its own family. Space is one of those forms of prosperity Americans barely talk about because it has become part of the scenery. A two-car garage, a laundry room, a basement, a walk-in closet, a backyard big enough for a grill, and a kitchen island the size of a British dining table can feel completely normal in large parts of the United States. To someone from northern England, where homes are often older, narrower, and built into denser streets, that normality can be the surprise. The numbers help explain why. US. Census data have put the median size of newly built single-family homes in recent years at roughly 2,200 to 2,300 square feet. English Housing Survey figures, by contrast, show the average usable floor area of homes in England at around 90 square meters, or just under 1,000 square feet, depending on tenure and property type. These are not perfectly identical measurements, but the physical difference is large enough that nobody needs a tape measure to notice it. Walk through a typical suburban development around Dallas, Charlotte, Columbus, or Kansas City, and the scale becomes part of everyday life. Bedrooms are expected to hold more than a bed. Kitchens often have enough counter space for appliances that would require diplomatic negotiations in a compact British kitchen. Garages swallow 2 vehicles and still somehow collect bicycles, lawn equipment, holiday decorations, and one box nobody has opened since 2014. In places such as Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle, or Liverpool, much of the housing stock grew up around a very different urban history. Terraced homes were built for dense industrial cities where people needed to live close to factories, rail lines, and town centers. Those neighborhoods have character that American suburbs often cannot reproduce, but they also teach residents to become unusually talented at making every square foot earn its keep. That is why American space can feel almost mischievous at first. A pantry gets its own room. The washing machine and dryer are not squeezed under a kitchen counter. A guest bedroom can remain a guest bedroom instead of becoming a combination office, storage unit, drying rack, and emotional support cupboard. The deeper difference is cultural. Americans have spent generations building around land abundance, automobiles, suburban expansion, and the idea that a successful household should have room to spread out. Space became part of the American definition of comfort, almost as natural as free refills or parking directly outside the store. And once someone lives with that space for a while, the effect is surprisingly powerful. Daily life becomes easier in small ways that never make headlines. Groceries can be bought in bulk because there is somewhere to store them. Children can play without every toy becoming a piece of hallway furniture. Family gatherings do not require rearranging the entire living room like a low-budget Broadway production. This may be why some overseas visitors begin to understand American prosperity differently after spending real time here. The country can look loud and excessive from a distance, but from inside an ordinary home, the excess often feels more like breathing room. That is a difficult luxury to photograph and an even harder one to give up. Freedom has wheels. A curious thing happens when people compare living standards only through wages. They miss the possessions that quietly turn income into freedom. In the United States, one of the clearest examples is sitting in millions of driveways every morning, usually beside a basketball hoop, a trash bin, and at least one package somebody forgot to bring inside. The car matters differently in America. According to US Census Bureau household data, roughly 9 in 10 American households have access to at least one vehicle, while multi-car households are extremely common. Britain has high car ownership too, but Department for Transport surveys have generally placed the share of households with access to a car or van closer to 4 and 5. In dense northern cities such as Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, and Sheffield, car ownership can be lower still because older neighborhoods were built around railways, buses, terraced housing, and compact streets long before anybody imagined a 3-row SUV. At first glance, that sounds like a transportation statistic. In daily life, however, it becomes something much bigger. Owning a dependable car means a job 20 miles away is still a realistic job. A cheaper supermarket across town remains accessible. Children can reach sports practice without turning the family calendar into a military operation. A weekend trip does not begin with checking whether the last train home leaves before dessert. That kind of mobility has economic value. America's geography almost forces the issue. Metropolitan areas such as Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, Phoenix, Atlanta, and Charlotte spread across enormous distances. So personal transportation became woven into everyday life. Roads widened, businesses followed highways, shopping centers gained parking lots large enough to give a European urban planner mild dizziness, and families gradually came to expect that distance should rarely stop them from going somewhere. Northern England developed through a completely different history. Manchester's industrial neighborhoods, Liverpool's dense inner districts, and Newcastle's older communities grew around walking, rail, and public transport. There is genuine charm in that compactness, especially when a pub, corner shop, or train station sits within a short walk. Yet it also means mobility can depend more heavily on schedules, routes, and where somebody happens to live. America hands much of that decision back to the individual. That may explain why visitors sometimes become attached to driving here more quickly than expected. The attraction is rarely the steering wheel itself. It is the strange pleasure of deciding at 8:40 p.m. that you want something from a store 12 miles away and treating the journey like a minor errand rather than an expedition requiring 3 apps and a timetable. There's also a wealth signal hiding inside the driveway. Maintaining one vehicle is expensive enough. Supporting 2 or 3 means a household is paying for insurance, fuel, maintenance, registration, and depreciation at the same time. Americans complain about those costs constantly and quite reasonably, but the fact that multi-car households remain normal tells its own story about purchasing power. The contrast becomes especially noticeable during a long stay. American distances initially seem ridiculous because everything appears to be 15 minutes away by car, including the coffee shop apparently located in another zip code. After a while, however, the scale stops feeling inconvenient and begins feeling liberating. You stop asking whether somewhere is nearby and start asking whether it is worth going. That subtle change says a lot about prosperity. Money is useful because it buys choices, and mobility multiplies those choices every single day. For many visitors, the American car eventually stops looking like an oversized cultural habit. It starts looking like something much harder to give up, control over where the day can take you. Perhaps the real surprise was never that America has problems, because every country does. It was discovering how much ordinary comfort, opportunity, space, mobility, and financial breathing room can exist beyond the headlines. Once people experience that America for themselves, the old picture becomes much harder to believe. So what part of American life do you think foreigners misunderstand most? Share your answer below, and subscribe to the channel as we keep exploring the America visitors rarely expect to find.